Hi, friends. Today, let's talk about the fact that it's not good for you to be alone. It's not good for us to be alone. How do we know that? Well, we know that right from the scriptures. In fact, we know it right from the beginning of humanity. We look at this in Genesis chapter 2. Just when God is creating man and woman, He's created Adam and He hasn't yet created Eve. Now remember that the story of Adam and Eve is more than a story. For us as Catholic Christians, we've always believed there is an Adam and Eve, regardless of what you might have heard in religious education or Catholic school. There was an Adam and Eve. We just don't know who and when and how it all worked, but we can get a sense of that when we try to match up the story of creation in the Genesis account with the story of evolution, the evolutionary theory. There can be some blending of that, and there have been some pretty smart scientists or theologians and theologians who are scientists who have tried to blend all that together. But the point is that somewhere along the line, as God was creating humanity, even across eons, that He breathed life into a man and a woman, and He made us different from all of creation. He made us in His image and likeness. He gave us a soul. And we are that creature among all creatures that have the possibility, well, not just a possibility, the reality that we will live an immortal life, either with Him or without Him. So there was that Adamah, who is from the earth, and there was that Eve, the Havah, who is out of man. And that's where we get their names. So Adam and Eve. Adam is he not yet has Eve, and what God recognizes from the beginning. And remember, this is still while Adam is in complete harmony with God and with nature itself. And God recognizes that it's, and this is literally in Genesis 2, it is not good for man to be alone. So what He does is that he parades in front of man a lot of animal life, like the birds of the ground, the birds of the air, the animals of the ground, and wild animals, domestic animals. And He has Adam name them. It's all about stewardship, and that's another talk, that we're given dominion over the earth, and what we do with the earth matters. After He parades a lot of these animals in front of Adam, He still says that, I see that none of these is a suitable partner for you. And that's where Eve comes along. And as soon as Eve comes on the scene, as soon as woman is made in the image and likeness of God, and Adam sees that in Eve as his equal partner, sees something of God in the woman who has the life of God in her. He says, this one at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of her man this one has been taken. So finally, Adam himself gets to see in another human being, now one who is made in the image and likeness of God, something of God Himself. Now, all this is important because what we see is that no other life form can give to a man or to a woman what it is that we need. In every aspect of life, of all who we are, body, mind, soul, in our relationships. And God sees this, and God makes that declaration that it is not good for man to be alone. Now, something about that just rings true in our life. Let's come out of Genesis and let's just go into everyday life. What does this mean? What is God really trying to say here? I think part of what he's trying to say, because that phrase, it is not good for man to be alone, is a loaded one. It's loaded. Because remember, God makes man in his image and likeness. And a big part of what that means is that we are made with something of the nature of God. That we reflect something of God's nature. And who is God? God is not alone. God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. From all of eternity, God has never been alone, is not alone, and never will be alone. God is a community of persons in one Godhead. And yes, that's a mystery to us, but a community of persons. And God sees this in humanity, that humanity needs a community. You need a community. I need a community. We need the love of another. We need the person of another, and not just another like in marriage. Yes, absolutely that. Or kids needing parents, yes. Or parents needing children, yes. But like other significant relationships and friendships in the community of believers, because it is in the reality of the other that we most reflect who we are as made in the image and likeness of God. That we are capable of loving another, and capable of receiving the love of another. That this is what is absolutely essential to humanity, is the other. And whenever we live our lives in such a way that somehow we're deprived of this, like when we live a selfish life, when we live a life where we are concentrating most of our time and energy and worries and pursuits and passions, falling in on ourselves, looking at ourselves as if through a mirror, trying to grasp for everything that we need to the deficit of so many others. What happens to us? There isn't real authentic love. Because love, for it to truly be love, needs to at least have one other. It needs to be freely and mutually exchanged. There has to be the object of our love. We cannot be the object of our own love. And the Trinity itself reflects this. The Trinity, the three persons in one God reflect this. That what makes God God is the Father loving the Son, and the Son loving the Father, and that love being so real and so active and so alive that it is another. It's a creative love from all of eternity. And that's then what we need and what we require and what is essential for us in our humanity, is that other. That one that we can call beloved, and the one who is the lover calling us beloved. And this is the stuff that gives us life, and this is the stuff that creates life. So when we live a selfish life, what begins to happen? The breakdown of relationships with other people, right? To the point where we begin to struggle with things that are bare and essential to what it means to be a human, like joy, happiness, yes, love, life, fulfillment, purpose, identity. All that begins to slip away from us when we live life for ourselves. And this is really important to us, and it really pronounces to us that it is not good for us to be alone. I'll give you another example of this. Look what is happening with our youth today. Like the kids that are in school now, teenagers, for example, they have the highest rate of depression and suicide than any other generation of young people in the history of us recording these rates of depression and suicide, and like in the Western world. Why is that? Why is it that kids today have more available to them than any other kids in any other generation in the whole history of humanity? It says to us that the stuff that we're giving our kids, important stuff like education and a roof over their head and all their gadgets and things and vacations and entertainment and sports and all their activities that they can be involved in. This isn't the stuff that's saving them from depression and from suicide. And we see so many of our kids with these electronic gadgets in their hands, always like this, right? And we are the most connected generation of peoples in the whole history of humanity. We can be connected with anyone across the world or any number of people at any time. It's unprecedented. And yet, we have never felt more alone. Because we realize that these gadgets in our hands and all of our activities aren't really the stuff that truly connects us. What truly connects us is that other person. What truly has the potential of giving us the authentic love and community that we need is the other person. And until we realize that and get back to us, our youth, and not just our youth when they're youth, but then when they get older and they're raising family, is in peril. Marriages are in peril. The highest rate of divorce in the history of the Western world. And now the highest decline in the number of people per capita who are not even getting married anymore. It terrifies them to get married because they don't know how to relate to another person. And these two are going hand in hand. That increase of divorce and that decrease in the number of people who are entering into marriage. And then the breakup of the family. In the history of the world, again, was the first time we've surpassed more children growing up in a family without two parents than with. Something has gone terribly wrong. And it doesn't stop there with just the human to human and us not being good for us to be alone, separated from one another, and all that contributes to that today. But just go one more chapter into Genesis 3. And what happens there? First of all, we're in perfect communion, perfect relationship, not just with one another, but with God himself. And then we break that communion. We choose something other than God. That's what happens when, and the taking of the bite of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil that God didn't want us to experience, the fruit of that, is he did not want us to have experiences of life separate from him, because evil is the absence of the good. And ultimately, the greatest good is God himself. And he just didn't want that for us. But we wanted it for ourselves, and he gave us free will for us. And on we go to this day, living lives in which we choose a lesser good than God, or the absence of good, absence of God himself for some other good, or something that we call good, or something that we redefined as good. And then what happened immediately after in the story of Adam and Eve in chapter 3 of Genesis? Immediately, something changed. Because first, it says when God brought man and woman together, man and his wife were both naked, yet they felt no shame. What does that mean? It means that they were perfectly vulnerable with one another. They could share everything about their lives. And they weren't just naked in the sense of physical, but they were naked in the sense of every dimension of their humanity. And they were not afraid to show that, and that the other would take advantage of them. But now, after the fall from God, what happens? They immediately hide themselves from one another, and they hide themselves from God. And so what we begin to see is that it is not good for man to be alone. Doesn't mean just us in our relationships with one another, but it also and most fundamentally means us in our relationship with God, or you in your relationship with God, and me in my relationship with God. And when we don't live in communion with God, it not only affects our relationship with God as individuals, it then affects our relationship with one another, because it has a cascading effect. When we live our lives not in communion with God, it contributes to breaking our communion with one another. And then we feel not only isolated from God, but in that isolation, we feel this aloneness and this deep loneliness from one another. I can't tell you how many times, I live a celibate life. Obviously, I'm a priest. I can't tell you how many times I've had married couples come to me over my 24 years of priesthood and talk about how they sleep in the same bed, and yet they feel this cold loneliness. And yet they physically are as close to another human being as they possibly could be. And yet they're not. And the two are deeply, intimately combined, interwoven, or at least that's how we are created to be, in a community of love with God. And then through that, capable and willing and able to be in a community of love with other people. But when we don't live our lives in that deep communion with God, we will never know this deep communion with one another. We'll know it in moments and in flashes of pleasure and so on, of intimacy, of ecstasy, right? But we will never know it in a sustaining way. And so it is so profound what God is teaching humanity in this primordial story that has such deep truth that spans all of the history of humanity and the reality of what it means to be human. It is not good to be alone. And I think that when we acknowledge that, and we've had experiences of that, what it calls us to do is to completely reevaluate our relationship with God and realize that if we want deep, profound, sustaining, fulfilling relationships with one another, like a spouse, like our children, like our parents, like our best friends, like a community of believers, then the first relationship we have to repair is that relationship with God, who is always willing to do the work on his part. But we have to do the work on our part. His part is in our loneliness. He decides to join us and become human with us. And then he calls us through redemption back to our own humanity so that we can be in a right love relationship with him. And from that, be in a right love relationship with one another. It is not good that man be alone. Until next time, friends.